I want to take you back 4 decades when, I guess, Pierre Trudeau enunciated for the first time that multiculturalism was going to be where it's at for Canada going forward. Yeah. And am I wrong to say that this policy would have been aimed at people like your family? And when you got here, did you feel it?
Sure did. And you're right, it was aimed at people like my family. But he also said something that most people, Pierre Trudeau that is, don't realize. He said that national unity, if it is to mean anything in the deeply personal sense, has to be founded on one's confidence in one's own individual identity. And only then can we feel the respect for self that allows us to engage with confidence with others and their assumptions and their attitudes. That is a very, very deep statement. And I must tell you, and I will make the case tonight, that that's not the kind of multiculturalism we have today.
What do we have today?
We have groupthink.
Which means what?
Fear of being nonconformist, fear of being told that what you've just said is racist, is bigoted, is prejudice. And the reason that this is a bad thing for women, for sure, and I'll explain that in a moment, but for all of us really, is that, I believe that these next several decades will be about innovation and creativity. When we put limits on our own thinking, always afraid of saying the wrong thing, that can't be good.
We do that?
We do. And let me just finish the thought here. That can't be good for our ability as citizens, as people, to come up with new solutions for old problems, which is my simple definition of creativity. So in fact, the argument that I'm making today and tonight only starts with women and multiculturalism. But there's a much bigger sort of outcome to it, which is what are we educating the next generation to think? Are we even educating them to think when we're always ready to pounce on something that they say that might be offensive to somebody else?
So are you saying it's time to say multiculturalism rest in peace?
Yes. However, I'm saying it's time to declare to declare the policy of multiculturalism as having had its day. And it had a great run, and I believe that it was right for its time, a time when Canada, like many other countries around the world, the Netherlands, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, were just beginning to come to terms with mass immigration, an era of mass immigration. For the last 40 years, multiculturalism on the whole has been a good policy. But we have to transition, I think, from an era of multiculturalism to, this will sound counterintuitive, to an era of global citizenship. Now let's just focus on this word citizenship for a second. What is it to be a citizen? It isn't just about having a passport. It isn't just about paying taxes. Being a citizen is about participating. And you can't participate openly, fully, in wholeness if you're afraid of what somebody else is going to pounce on you for and jump down your throat for.
Okay, global citizenship, more on that in a second.
We'll get to that,
I want to go, what you're saying strikes at the heart, some would argue, of one of the most important fundamental values of being Canadian. I mean, multiculturalism is right up there with Medicare and gold medal hockey performances at Olympics, right? It's some of the stuff.
I watched. And
where? From where?
From New York.
From New York.
Of course.
On NBC, probably.
Yeah.
Wasn't quite as much fun on NBC, I have to say.
You're right.
But you're touching in some respects the third rail of what it means to be a Canadian, because multiculturalism is right up there on that pantheon, aren't you?
And if I am, so what?
And if you are, you better defend yourself, because there are some people who aren't going to be too happy about that.
Well, okay, then let's talk, and that's what we're going to do. So multiculturalism, let's start with this question of, is it bad for women? All right, which is the starting point for my critique of this core element of Canadian identity, as you put it. The vast majority of cultures around the world that we're aware of are patriarchal. Pretty much every anthropologist accepts that point. And what do I mean by patriarchal? Again, quite clearly, it means that the drives, the desires, and demands of men in those cultures outweigh, hold more water than those of women, and in some cases, a lot more water. Now, let's couple that reality with the policy of multiculturalism. The chief aim of the policy of multiculturalism since 1971, 72, and to this very day, is to preserve cultural traditions from which immigrants come. So if some of those cultural traditions are anathema to another one of our ideals, at least in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is gender equality, then we have to confront the hard truth that every once in a while, and sometimes more often than we care to acknowledge, the ideal of gender equality bumps up against the ideal of multiculturalism.
Okay, again.
And we've got to figure out a way to move forward, knowing that we have a culturally diverse country, but not one in which all differences deserve to be celebrated. Some, yes, not all.
But when we celebrate multiculturalism in Canada, I think we're celebrating the nice parts of multiculturalism, not the honor killings and the female genital mutilations and all of that, right?
You're right that we're not celebrating all of that, FGM and honor killings and so forth. But we also, what we are not doing enough is questioning and challenging those things. And I'll give you a very clear example of what I mean. You remember the story of Aqsa Parvez, the 16-year-old girl, local girl who was suffocated to death by her father and her brother for refusing to wear hijab. She ran away from home a couple of times, and on one of those occasions, according to the agreed statement of facts that came out of the court case, so both parties had to agree to these facts. According to that statement, Aqsa confided to a group of her friends that my father has threatened to kill me, and that he has put his hand on the Quran and sworn to God that he is going to kill me if I continue to refuse hijab. And her friends, according to this statement, said, he can't be serious. She pleaded with them that he was, and they wouldn't take it seriously. Now, do I know why they didn't? I don't know. I'll be very honest about that. Nobody knows. But, I've mentored 16 and 17-year-old girls. They trust each other more than they trust anybody, outside of their circles. And it takes something that much more powerful, namely socialization, for them to not believe one of their own. And what I think it would be valid to at least question, maybe the reason that they didn't take it seriously is that they've been brought up to believe that everything about other people's cultures is wonderful, and that what we're supposed to be is nice, and that if we challenge what somebody says to us that might make us uncomfortable about their culture, we can't go there. Okay? I'm saying at least raise the question. And of course, I can say that because I'm a brown chick. The other day, I did an interview with this guy. It'll be aired probably in a couple of weeks, but here's the thing. I said to him, Steve, do you honestly believe that if you raised that question, you'd be able to get away with it as a white guy? He told me that was a cop-out, simply because he's a journalist, and he's not allowed to have opinions in public, okay? But then let me turn over the question to some of you, okay? Those of you who are the white guys in the audience, or for that matter, even white women in this audience, would you be able to raise that question and feel that you would be heard? And maybe we can get to that during the Q&A, because if you really do feel that you can, I want to know about it. But I can tell you that I've been in classrooms across this country in which people sort of look at each other, dart their eyes, look down. They know what I'm driving at.
Because there's a chill. We can't talk about it.
There is a chill. Sure there is. And again, it's not, you can't blame it on multiculturalism's policy. We have to put the responsibility where it lies, and that is with us, people. Those of us who are practicing multiculturalism in a way that shuts down thinking rather than liberates it.
But okay, I wonder if you're throwing out the, and I'm not going to use the right word here, but you're throwing out too much of multiculturalism. I'm just wondering, because wherever you go in this world, and you go a lot of places in this world, I suspect, and I suspect people also say to you when they know of your connection to Canada, Canada's a miracle. Canada has all these people from all over the world living relatively peacefully together without so much of the anger and killing that you see in other parts of the world. And multiculturalism surely has to get a lot of the credit for that, no?
No. No, on two fronts. No, they don't say that about Canada.
They don't say that
They
about?
do
I
not
hear
say that. Really?
Sure.
I don't know where you're going, but I'm going to places that are also multicultural and sometimes even constitutionally so. And you know what they're saying? Help us. Help us figure out how to do this. Help us figure out how not to reduce people to labels so that we can see people as more complicated and therefore less frightening than we see each other today.
So labelless people means what?
Well, it means first and foremost, Steve, seeing you and you seeing me as an individual before deciding that because you think I belong to this group, that culture, and this religion, and oh yeah, that gender, that I guess I know where she's coming from. I realize that in this country, as in a lot of other multicultural countries, the word individual carries some baggage because people often, in my experience, think of the word individualism, okay? That's not what I'm advocating. Individualism states, I'm out for myself and I don't care if my society benefits. Individuality, which is what I do advocate, individuality states, I am myself. My unique self, not somebody endowed with the baggage of my parents and their homeland, but somebody who is capable of self-reflection and personal growth. And by expressing, you wanted me to express myself a little too much tonight? By expressing my unique self, I give something to my society. That's individuality. And that's what a lot of multicultural societies, in some cases, more so than our own, but I would suggest our own as well, have a lot of trouble wrapping our heads around.
It is impossible for someone to look at you, even if they didn't know you, and not look and immediately say, female, brown, right? That's human nature, isn't it?
It might be. It might be. And when you say that, you make a really excellent point. And my analysis about what is possible falls down on this, among other fronts, but this one as well. From an evolutionary point of view, I don't think that we as human beings have gotten to the point where we easily transcend tribalism, okay? We do reduce one another, but notice that easily does not mean impossibly. And it's one thing to use labels as a starting point. That person might be interesting. Quite another to use labels as a finish line. So even if I'm going to approach you as a white guy, okay, just for your own humanity and out of respect for our shared humanity, I'm going to ask you questions. I'll bet you've got a lot of interesting stories to tell. And some of those stories are going to turn the tables on assumptions that I make about you. And that's all I am suggesting, is that, you know, we equip a new generation to ask questions and not expect each other to be mere products of a cultural assembly line. I don't mind speaking in some ways for a larger group of people and not just myself when I say, one of the comments that I get routinely from young Canadians, and that means young Canadians who are not white too, is I'm tired of being a hyphenated Canadian. You know, when people ask me where am I really from and I say Canada, they don't accept that. What they mean, of course, is where are my parents from? Well, why am I always the property of my parents? Why can't I just be me? And then go ahead and ask me questions about where my family is from or whatever. But why the assumption that in order to be authentic in your eyes, I have to be hyphenated? Doesn't that say something about the limits that we put on our own thinking?
So I'm in media and media labels. So when I look at you, I'm, by training, by inclination, by everything else, probably going to want to label you. If I were going to try to do that, what's your label, Irshad? I'm not going to let you get away with global citizen yet.
Okay.
So what are you?
Okay. Well, first of all, let me ask you this, and then I promise to answer your question. You say that as a journalist, I'm trained to label you. In your capacity as a journalist, Steve, do you finish with labels, or
No.
do you just start with them?
It's a place to start.
It's
Agreed.
a place to start.
Agreed.
Okay, so we're not disagreeing here. Not that there's anything wrong with disagreeing, but we're not disagreeing here, right? So my labels, I talked about myself as an educator. Not because that's where I derive my income, but because that's what I love to do. That's where I find my joy.
But it's an entry point for me, right? It's a place to start.
Sure.
If I want to communicate with this person, I need to, okay, female, born somewhere else, educator,
if you wish to start
political,
there,
whatever.
if you wish to start there, of course. But again, my experience with young Canadians especially is that, well, their complaint is that people finish there, okay? And because they see my skin color, or they see my gender, or they know about my sexuality, if it is not straight, or something like that, that's where they pigeonhole me. That's where they put me. And guess what? I'm about so much more than that. And sometimes it's really difficult for people who are being typecast and slotted to find the way to articulate that they are so much more. So what happens is people assume, and then people who are being assumed about nod their heads, and then return the favor of assuming. And what we don't get are vibrant conversations. What we don't get are vibrant dialogues. And incidentally, I want to emphasize here, this is not just Canada. This is other societies too that are grappling with these kinds of issues. So for instance, those of you who follow the news know that in the UK, there's been yet another recent kerfuffle about gender segregation and rising calls for gender segregation in UK universities. You know that in India, rising censorship of anything that is critical of Hindu fundamentalism or the party that represents Hindu nationalism. In Australia, not too long ago, HarperCollins pulped a book called The Daring Book for Girls, in which one of the chapters was about how girls can learn, this is in Australia, can learn how to play the didgeridoo. You know what happened? A leader, an Aboriginal male leader, took HarperCollins to task, saying that in our culture, we do not allow girls and women to play the didgeridoo. And what did HarperCollins do? They caved. The Daring Book for Girls caved to cultural sensitivity. And my point simply is this, that cultural sensitivity, if taken to thoughtless extremes, winds up being the exact opposite of cultural sensitivity, which is tolerance for abuse of power.
Then let's find out more about from multiculturalism to what? Global citizenship for you entails what?
Well, let me start with the word that so many of us confuse multiculturalism with, and that is diversity. Put it in the same breath, but in fact, I would argue that it's not the same thing at all. Because diversity is not just about your skin color, my religion, and somebody else's gender. Diversity involves also what happens up here. Diversity of thought, diversity of viewpoint, of opinion. And different points of view are naturally going to offend different people because they weren't raised that way, so offense will be inevitable. The point I'm making is this, offense, and this is the really hard truth that we have to grapple with as Canadians and people who live in a diverse society or an increasingly diverse society. Offense is not the problem to be avoided at any cost. In fact, offense, taking it, and from time to time giving it, is the price of honest diversity.
We're Canadians. We don't like offending.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. You cannot like it if you want to not like it. But in order to liberate thinking, we have to risk it. every once in a while. So this is a larger argument I'm making about the difference between education and indoctrination. Indoctrination stifles the capacity to think. Education frees the capacity to think. But with that freedom comes the risk, from time to time, of both offending and being offended. So I'm going to give you, in the typical Canadian style, I guess, a middle ground, right? Which is that we can actually adopt tactics to diffuse immediate horror. For example, if I'm going to be asking, and again, I know that I can get away with a lot that many people think they can't, but if I'm going to be asking something that I fear will be in any way offensive to you, I can start by saying, this is a question, not an assumption. Or I'm asking, not assuming. And this may be kind of uncomfortable for you. I'm asking out of genuine curiosity, and please know, you're totally entitled to ask anything of me.
So you've disarmed me now at this point.
One hopes, but yeah. the thing is that what you're doing is setting the table for somebody to come to terms with their own emotions. Because remember, that's what identity is. At the end of the day, it's not rational, and it's not intellectual at all. Identity is emotional. And as anybody who has ever studied neuroscience knows, emotions are far more powerful than intellect. And so you're giving people literally time to come to terms with what their emotions may be telling them and allow those defenses to come down for the sake of being understood and, yes, seeking to understand.
Okay, I get what we gain by being global citizens. Do we lose anything by being global citizens?
Well, you're asking the wrong person. I'm limited in my thinking too. And frankly, these are ideas that I don't get enough opportunity to engage with other people about. So if we are losing something by transitioning from the multiculturalism mindset to the diversity way of thinking, meaning diversity of thought and not just of appearance, if we're losing something by that, except for time, right, because it takes time to engage, I don't know what we're losing. But I would welcome hearing that from somebody or many others in the audience tonight.
Well, a little offense is good, right? We need to offend each other a little bit, but there presumably is a line somewhere that Canadians generally don't feel comfortable crossing, and that's one of the things that makes us Canadians.
But why? This is going to sound really naive, as if everything before that has not. But why comfort as the standard for what we say and don't say, or what we ask and don't ask? If something is roiling inside of you, if there is a question that is just burning to come out of your brain and your heart, why do we succumb to the standard of comfort?
I think I may have an answer.
Tell me.
I don't know. I think when we watch what goes on south of the border, we think it's a freak show, and we're not interested. We don't want to be part of that.
Well,
and so we tone it down up here, sometimes to our benefit and sometimes to our detriment, as you would suggest.
What's the benefit, by the way? And I'll get to the United States in just a second, but what's the benefit of toning it down?
We don't kill each other up here the way that they do down there. That's a good benefit.
Well, no, actually some people do die as a result. Aqsa Parvez is one of them.
Some,
okay?
But surely not on the scale the scale of the carnage of living in the United States is not what it is in Canada, right?
Let me tell you something about the United States,
Sure.
Steve. The United States is even more hamstrung by the fear of offense than we are.
Than Canada?
Than Canada. Yes. Now, you wouldn't know it from all the guns
Watching
that are
cable
going
TV
off.
and
I get
yeah.
that. But no, you can, politics is politics. And, that's a blood sport in the United States, okay? But I can tell you, and I didn't understand this, by the way, before I started living in New York, that the U.S. is steeped and in many ways captured by the dichotomy of black and white. I'll tell you a quick story. When just after Obama was first elected president, I was invited to speak to a large, mostly African-American audience at Southern Methodist University in Texas. And I went into that talk with my, naive Canadian self, talking about the fact that apart from all of the other issues that you people are dealing with, all of you people as Americans, you've got to understand that in 10 years' time, according to your own Census Bureau, 60% of Americans under the age of 14 will be non-white. And I pointed out that doesn't just mean black. It means Hispanic, it means Asian, and various combinations, permutations, and derivations thereof.
Native American too, I
Native
presume.
American too, exactly. They didn't want to hear it, Steve. In fact, I was practically booed off the stage. And I didn't understand why at first. And then after the event was over, somebody who took pity on me said to me, it's because you threatened the machine. You threatened the black-white machine. And when I talk about diversity being this diversity of thought and not just of appearance, I can honestly tell you that it is African-American practitioners, professionals of diversity, who are the first ones to walk out.
Did you say that out loud down there?
Yes.
You did.
Yes. Oh, yes.
So there's a lot of people invested in the status quo.
Precisely. On the one hand, and welcome to politics, railing against the status quo. On the other hand, not unlike Israel-Palestine and all kinds of other dichotomies, invested in it.
Okay.
So we've got more fluidity here. But that doesn't mean that we can rest on our laurels. We're often talking about, well, what is it that we should be known for, apart from, the things that you've already mentioned, like hockey, and, obviously doing a fine job so far on the world front in that regard. But I think that we've got a golden opportunity to lead the rest of the world, as far as educators are concerned, in global citizenship. Like I say, multicultural societies and leaders of multicultural societies don't know anymore how to develop social cohesion. We're in a beautiful position in this country to begin to experiment with different ways of expressing diversity and thereby actually speaking to leaders in other countries, educators first and foremost, about what works and what's worth trying. And I've done a lot of these experiments myself in classrooms, my own as well as those of other people who've been brave enough to invite me to their classrooms. I must tell you that the results are outstanding.
Well, here's something worth trying. I think we should try to get the audience in.
Let's do it.
Because I just checked my watch, and we've had a heck of a good run here, if I may say so, Irshad. Let's see. Are we putting a microphone in the middle of the hall? Is that how we're going to do this, or are people just going to stand up and ask? Is that what's happening, or have you got a hand mic back there? You do. Okay, there's hand mics. So let's just, what I'm going to do here is put my glasses on so I can see everybody. We got a first question over here. Okay, so let's just remind everybody of our ground rules here, which are we're going to try to be as short and expeditious as possible so we can get as many people in as possible, and that goes for the answers as well.
I was going to say, yeah.
Shoot.
Okay. This question actually comes from Twitter, so I'm just reading a question from Allison Lote. And Allison asked, what does global citizenship really mean? Citizenship, by definition, is connected to one country, is it not?
Yeah, great question in that regard. I think the industrial age definition of citizen is tied to one country, but the industrial age is over. The digital age is well here. And that does mean blurred lines. And it doesn't just mean blurred boundaries between nation states. It also means blurred boundaries of identity. And that's what a lot of young Canadians who contact me about these issues are saying. I'm so much more than, as I say, the labels that people reduce me to. And by the way, what I say to them is rather than just complaining about how other people treat you, how about stepping up to the plate and reminding people right off the bat that you can ask me, where my family comes from, but let me first tell you something about myself that you may not know.
Gotcha. Down here in the front, please.
I have two questions. One, I was in the forefront of when multiculturalism was being implemented in Canada. the immigrant community at that time was represented by people with long beards, and they'd developed the policies which became chains and boundaries, big walls for immigrant women under which we were hidden. What do we need to do to break those walls? Second question is...
No, one at a time. One please. Go
I
ahead.
will stop talking after that.
What do we need to do to break those walls?
So I'm going to answer your question directly, but first let me give some context to that answer. One of the really backward developments that we have to confront under the umbrella of multiculturalism is that even in very elite circles, universities and so forth, people have decided that there is such a thing as cultural rights, meaning that cultures, according to this theory, deserve rights as much as individuals do. That is dangerous, because when cultures are given rights, it's not the entire community that gets those rights. It's a thin network of individuals within those cultural communities who already have the power, the men with beards, as you say, who already have the power to dictate what customs are going to be accepted, what customs are off limits to questioning. And so here's the great irony. In the name of diversity, in the name of cultural sensitivity, we actually wind up widening the power disparity between those guys and the most vulnerable in that community, mostly women and children. So what do we need to do? The next time, to break these walls, the next time you are told, you are instructed to respect a particular custom that your conscience tells you is unhealthy, ask out loud, not just to yourself, but out loud, what does my respect for that custom do to the most vulnerable members of that community? Ask that question out loud. You'll ignite a conversation that wasn't there before.
Gotcha. Over here, please.
Irshad, thank you for your thoughts. I think you're awesome. My question...
Where can you see where the question is?
I don't see the question.
Where are you?
Oh,
right here.
Thank you very
Okay,
much. Okay.
I think individuality as an ideal is awesome, and I want to start by saying that I really believe in conversation as the beginning point for change, but I wonder, recognizing that racism, that heteronormativity are embedded systems of oppression, is individuality an ideal that is something we're working toward in the future, and that in the present we need to as privileged people in a variety of different ways, take a step back, allow other people to lead, and educate ourselves. I think there's so much ignorance that's out there, and I wonder if we really should be relying on other people to educate us rather than taking the time for ourselves to learn some of these things without committing microaggressions on such a regular basis.
Right. Look, that's a very, very important question. Let me tell you from my experience what I've learned over the last decade as I've been engaging people from all kinds of backgrounds around the world who have the same concern as you do. A woman by the name of José, who is a woman from New Brunswick, emailed me not so long ago with this scenario. She said, I was vacationing on the seaside last summer, and I saw a number of women with hijab, and it bothered me, she said, because I always wonder in the back of my mind, is that really a choice? And then she went on in that email to say something very deep. She said, here's what I realized as I reflected on that question. Here's what I realized truly bothered me. What bothered me was that I don't feel enough freedom to just approach them to ask, is that really a choice? And she said, here's the problem with not feeling that freedom. When we don't feel the permission to engage in all honesty with one another, then suspicions of the other actually rise. Because then we're always wondering, what do they not want me to know about them? What's their agenda? And so, again, in the name of being sensitive, we wind up actually undermining diversity. Us versus them develops. And you know what happens when societies balkanize along us versus them lines. So that's the kind of insight that I hope more people will apply to how the kind of society they want to live in. It's true that there's racism. I've been the target of it myself, and I know that many others in this audience have felt it. But understand this, that if we're not actually honestly engaging with one another, then the walls that this woman, Aruna Pap, has just talked about rise. Where's our vaunted diversity then? Where is it? That, again, is not, that's a nuance that is actually not marginal and not insignificant. It goes to the core of how we see one another.
Over here at the right.
I was wondering if you have any comments about the First Nations situation in Canada, because that is a culture that is given self-independence and it's different from the norm, say. Just wonder what you have to say about that.
Well, yeah, I simply have to say that I really hope that, you know, when First Nations communities are being engaged about social policy and about economic policy for that matter, that women are not just invited to be in the room, but more than invited, are required to be in the room. Incidentally, the Australian government has gone as far as to require certain consultations to happen only in the event that at least 50% of the women in the room, 50% of the people in the room are women. Now, I know that that can become formulaic and, you know, sort of boil down to quotas, and I worry about that myself. But unless those kinds of measures are taken, then it's just too easy, you know, for the same people to be talking to the same people about the same things. And we also have to ask, what happens in cases of community consultations when those women speak their truth to power in those rooms? What happens when they go back to their communities? How are they treated? What's their experience? I'm not saying it's all bad. I'm certainly not saying it's easy either. I think those are the kind of things that we have to pay attention to, especially as policymakers.
And that's a real imposition, though, on their culture.
Oh, is it? An imposition on their culture?
I mean, it is to impose that on them.
Well, you know, the word impose carries a lot of baggage. And in the class that I was teaching just this past January at NYU, we were talking exactly about that word. And one of my students, very, very liberal in her thinking, piped up at one point and said, wait a minute, why fear the word impose? If you have to impose a particular measurement of progress for the sake of otherwise voiceless people being heard, then embrace the word impose. I still have issues with that word, I will tell you up front, but I thought that was a really brave thing of that student to say. And maybe that's also something that we have to wrestle with.
Let's go question right here, please.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I applaud you. I mean, you're amazing. I've dedicated the past 10 years of my life to integration in Canada, inspired by the fact that I'm ethnic, immigrant, and so we are one of the most labeled society in the world. In fact, the United Nations asked Canada to stop using the term visible minority about 5 years ago. So, but I always talk about the economic impact, and so I wanted to know what your thoughts were on what is the economic impact of that culture of silos that we have created? You know, and you know, we talk about how it starts with all of us, and I agree. I mean, I did something about it 10 years ago, and I haven't stopped.
Right.
You know, but how do we teach the next generation that they, you know, they do have a voice, and how do we bridge their voices to the policymakers? Because I have to give you this example where I give a speech in front of 250 South Asian kids from York region, and part of the discussion was around whether or not, I mean, the first question I asked was, how many future prime ministers do we have in this country? And you could have heard a pin drop, and one young lady stood up and said, we could never be the prime ministers of this country because we're South Asians. And I thought, were you not born in Canada? Or even if you weren't, what makes you think that you don't have that opportunity?
Right.
And she said, you know, when you walked in, you might have noticed that there was a survey from the school board that asked us, whether or not we were South Asian and which part of South Asia we came from, right? So my question is, what is the economic value when we think about, for example, that 55% of the population in the GTA is visibly in the minority and only 20% occupy boardroom seats, and we know that we have brilliant minds driving cabs when we should be thinking about...
Let's get an answer to the question.
So,
go ahead.
Well,
Thank
thank you for the question, and I mean, you won't be surprised to hear that I do think that there is economic impact, and I don't know if it's devastating economic impact, but I do know that it is devastating to the dreams of a lot of the people who come to this country, and of course, a lot of the kids who are growing up in households where traditions are maintained that rub up against their own imaginations and their own creativity. And so, in case anybody in this audience feels like, oh my God, what that lady is saying about how these kids are told to fill out surveys and check off the boxes, literally. And that's, I don't want to be thought of as somebody who would want kids to do that. Understand that the way to educate, I think, the next generation to really assert its individuality in all of its uniquenesses is to give them the confidence to realize that, again, instead of waiting for other people to learn something new about you, up front, make it clear that there's something about me that you can't know just based on how I look. Let me tell you a quick story. Let me tell you something interesting about my life, and then invite others to do the same. We've got to seize the reins. It's not just up to quote unquote white people to take that step. It's up to people who don't want to be reduced, and that includes white folks who don't want to be reduced to their skin colors or their parents' backgrounds, but who want to be celebrated for all that they are, not just some of what they are. It's up to us to take that first step. That is what a learning society is about, and that comes with confidence.
For what it's worth, that's a very distressing story about those kids, because we actually live in a country, again, unlike our neighbors to the south, where you actually don't have to be born here to be the head of the government here. Starting with Sir Johnny MacDonald and all the way through.
But you picked up on her point about labeling, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
No, but because I see it everywhere I go, and by the way, increasingly, America is falling into the trap that we've already fallen into.
We have a question back here.
Yeah, but the lighting is really hard here, so it's hard to see where you are. Who's
Right
got the
back
microphone?
Hi.
Yes, right in the middle.
Yeah, this is my.
No.
I have a question for Irshad.
Where are you?
Here.
Do you
Can
see
you
her?
stand
Here.
up? Can you stand up?
To your.
Oh, she's over here. She's on the left. Okay.
Thank you.
Microphone guy, we need your help. You gotta help.
Okay,
You're the only guy I can see out there.
So yeah, I mean,
Go ahead.
like everybody else before me, I'm really impressed, and I've heard you speak before too. My question to you is, I mean, it's a good direction to be going in, possibly, but we have to be careful. I mean, where are the checks and balances to make sure that we don't become part of a vanilla assimilation process? I mean, you hear of, the citizenship system is going to change and you'll have to learn English and all this other stuff. And you've already seen the Netherlands have gone back, Denmark has gone back, no multiculturalism there. How do you make sure we don't go there?
My honest to God answer to you is that individuality is the essence of diversity. When you say that what you're concerned about is assimilation, not just integration, but assimilation to the point where we become a vanilla society, if we're actually encouraging the next generation to express, members of the next generation, to express their points of view, not based on where their parents come from or on the identity communities to which they belong, but rather as people who have experienced all kinds of things in life, I tell you, we will not have to worry about being vanilla, because life is deliciously complicated. And when I say to somebody like Steve, I'll bet as a white guy, you've got great stories to tell, not just about being white, but just about being human. My worry, my personal worry, is that by not inviting those personal narratives in their own voices, in your own voice, that is where when we start becoming vanilla. And that is when we start reducing people to the predictable pigeonholes. If you're gonna reduce people, do it in an unpredictable way. Be original. Be original. Be innovative.
I see somebody here. Okay, go ahead, please.
Irshad, you said we're now in a digital age, and on the video and often through social media, through anonymity, people can be very hateful, very racist, say horrible things. How can social media in this digital age be used to enhance individuality, global citizenship, and so on?
Right. Well, one of also the things that I've come to learn over the last many years, and this might sound a little fluffy to some of you, but bear with me, is that transformation happens in relationship. Meaning that if the Globe runs a story about you, you will be seen as public property by many of the readers of that story. They don't know you, they don't know your life, they don't know you as a human being. And so up will come some of the nastiest, most vitriolic stuff that we've all seen, right? When I've received those types of things, as anybody who's read the first few pages of my latest book knows, I've done my best to engage. And funnily enough, when I write back, it's amazing how many times I get back, oh, I'm sorry. I mean, not I'm sorry because I said what I said, but oh, you're actually human. You actually read this stuff. You're not inanimate. You have a heart. You have a brain. And they may say, I still disagree with you, but
They tone it down.
Good for you. You keep going kind of thing. My point simply is this, that when you engage, you start being in relationship with somebody else. And that is when you start developing trust and you start developing stakes. They're invested in you. And so that is when what you have to teach them, and frankly, what they have to teach you, begins to matter, right? Otherwise, don't look to social media for education. It can be, again, a starting point, but that's not what we need as education. What we need are more educators, flesh and blood educators, who are not just willing, but jazzed about having and igniting those uncomfortable conversations within their own classrooms. I know that a lot of teachers are afraid, their schools being sued or parents being upset and so forth. But here's what I found so far in my life. It only takes a small number of people, and in this case, educators, to get the ball rolling and to report back to a wider network of educators to get them excited. Why? Why get them excited? Because now those educators are in relationship with these educators. And that's how the ripple effect happens. So I'm actually not calling for anything what I consider to be radical. I'm saying if each one of us, just more of us than is happening right now, decided that 2014 will be the year in which I speak to one person about my complexity and invite them to do the same, just one, okay? Imagine 31, 32 million such experiments, all over this country. I have to believe that something different will take place as a result of those experiments. Will it succeed? I have no idea. It's experimental. But why not try? And maybe this is where the downside of global citizenship comes in, but I still haven't heard what the downside is, especially since I've addressed that fear of going vanilla.
Question over here, please.
Is that me, or I don't know?
Yes, sir, right here.
I wonder, does the...
Can you stand up, sir, so that other people can
Well,
hear
it'll
properly?
take me a couple of minutes. Do you mind waiting?
That's fine. I can wait.
I can do it, but let me get to the question.
All right, okay.
I'm wondering how you feel about the Quebec Charter and whether that represents a step towards or away from global citizenship.
2 thumbs down. Not just one, but two. Very deliberately two. Because that charter of secular values, and by the way, I'm all for secularism if it's defined as separation of religious institution from government. I'm all for secularism. But that charter comes from a place of fear. And first of all, anything that comes from a place of fear, truly, unless it's a life and death situation, typically doesn't end well, okay? But secondly, why the two thumbs down? Because let me just tell you how I define culture, and then I'll take it from there. Culture, when you strip away all of the academic niceties, culture is simply this: how we do things, or more passively, how things are done. This is an incubator for groupthink, for a cozy consensus that is rarely challenged and rarely questioned. The Quebec government, in my view, is coming from that place of culture as groupthink. And the fear is that a French-speaking minority culture within all of Canada will now be subsumed, be overwhelmed by all of these other cultures. So what we have is groupthink afraid of groupthink, which becomes even more entrenched in fear. So it's actually double the problem that I'm talking about. There is no aspiration as such in my reading of the Quebec Charter of Rights, of secular rights. It's fear, not aspiration.
Irshad, if the PQ wins a majority government, as many are
Expected,
forecasting,
right.
what do you think that says about the province of Quebec in 2014?
Again, I don't think that sends an aspirational message to the next generation in Quebec. I could be wrong. Any of us could be wrong, and who knows what the future holds. But precisely because of the intention, the motivation, not the stated purpose, i.e. bring all of us together, because it's clearly not bringing everybody together, okay? But because of the more, in my view, clear motivation of fear that goes behind it, I think it degrades a discussion that could otherwise be rife with questions, not statements, and therefore a lot more constructive.
Speaking of which, let's see if we can get a few more in here. Who's got the microphone? Back there? Go ahead, please. Go ahead. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you very much for your talk. In the Canadian context, from what I've heard from you this evening, you are maybe suggesting that our Canadian human rights legislation is supportive of multiculturalism, and maybe we need to question it because it's not looking at the individuality and vulnerability of many individuals within those cultures and races. Can you comment more clearly on the Canadian context?
Sure,
Thank you.
Sure. I can simply add this, that even the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which has as part of its aspiration both gender equality and multiculturalism, even that charter, Section 27 specifically, points out that this charter shall be interpreted consistent with the multicultural heritage of Canadians. Now, to my reading of the charter, that instantly puts women at a disadvantage. And that is the starting point of my concern. The greater concern that I have is that it also, as I said earlier, but I don't think I can emphasize it enough, it also puts a cap on how far we go in what we think can be innovative solutions to nagging problems. Because if it has to be consistent with the multicultural heritage, and if the elders of a cultural community are saying this is off limits to questioning, we automatically, just as an assumption, we say to ourselves, oh, okay, then I can't go there. When in reality, we've got to understand that those are individuals who are saying this. They're not speaking for the entire cultural community. And so who is it that is voiceless? We got to seek out those voices and see what they have to say as well.
I think I see gentleman standing up right there. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I would like to differ with you about the fact that what's happening in Quebec is based on fear. It's based on analysis and rationality. In my lifetime, I started to read the paper when I was...
Sir, I'm going to ask you to hold the microphone firm in front of
I
you.
started to read the newspaper when I was 12, and at that time, in Canada, we were a third of the population. And then we went to 25, and now we are 19. And I could give you a ton of statistics and demography that shows that we are vanishing out. This is not imagination. This is mathematics and demography. Of course, when you see that, you don't feel comfortable. But I don't like the idea that my fear, which I have, is based on pure fantasy. It's based on very precise figures. Of what happened after that, I would just jump to another argument. When Trudeau invented his thing, the big discussion in Ottawa, I moved to Ottawa when I was a young man, and the big discussion in Ottawa in the 70s was, are we really different from the American? What is our identity? And somebody came with this eureka thing. The American have the melting pot. We will have the unmelting pot. And voila.
Sir, I'm going to nudge you towards a question if I can.
Yes.
Is there a question here?
I was trying to disagree that it is based on fantasy. Yes, there is fear, but it is based on very precise facts.
Okay.
And also it is based on the fact
Let's
that...
get a response if we can,
Okay,
sir.
sir, thank you. I didn't say that it's based on fantasy. I'm glad that you acknowledge your fear, and I give you total credit for doing so. I think that takes courage to do so, so I thank you for that. But I did notice that in your preamble to the question, that you did say we are dying out. And again, you and I can talk more after the event is over, but I have to ask how you define we, because, and I don't mean O-U-I, I mean W-E, right? I have to ask that because, you see, I see you, if you share my values of secularism, and I think you do, based on what you've just said, I see you as a part of my community. Why? This is a community that I've chosen to create based on shared values. You are part of my we. Now, if I'm not speaking French at all, or to the degree that you would want me to, I get the sense, we can talk later, I get the sense that I'm not a part of your we. And so I just want, to acknowledge here that the way you define community is based on a particular condition that is not about people creating community, but rather instantly being a part of it. That is the fear that I'm talking about, and I don't think that that lives up to the best potential of a pluralistic society.
I think applause.
Back here.
I think we're going to have time for one last question. Lady with the microphone, go ahead, please.
Why should we always assume that women would be at a disadvantage in a cultural identity?
Well, we don't have to always assume that, but I think it would be ignorant and irresponsible to not go there every once in a while. And you know who doesn't go there? Talking about Quebec just now? You all remember the Bouchard-Taylor Commission report? Not that most of us have read it, but I've read it. And I was looking for some kind of an acknowledgement in that report that, yeah, there are going to be issues with accommodation, cultural and religious accommodation. There will be issues with the aspiration to gender equality. No mention, not one. The report ends off with how to answer people who are against religious and cultural accommodation. The soundbite answers, but nothing about many women who have also spoken to the commission to say, there's a problem here, and our voices within those cultural communities also deserve to be heard. So, again, it goes back to whether we're willing to dig for, to work for, undigging, digging out the voiceless and giving them voice. That's it. It's not complicated, and yet, if at that elite of a level, we're not doing that, imagine how it's not being done at the most basic level, too. That's what I'm saying.
Jane, are you coming up to wrap it up, or is Jane coming up to wrap it up? Just before Heather wraps it up, it's great to see you again. I know you all want to join me in thanking Irshad Manji for coming up here from New York City again.